My name is Shelley Freeman. I'm a teacher of English language learners in Kentucky, and I'm also a student of methodologies for working with culturally diverse students and their families. Based on current growth trends, organizations such as Colorado, Colorado, grant makers, and the Migration Policy Institute, as well as the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics, estimates that by the year 2020, half of all of our students will have backgrounds that are of non-English speaking origin. In fact, the rate of growth has been so steep that educators and other stakeholders are finding themselves ill-equipped to meet the needs of these culturally diverse learners. And as many educators know, the best way to meet the needs of our learners is to effectively communicate with them and their families. In this video, I will discuss one family's experiences who have immigrated to the United States, considering their country of origin and the cultural challenges that they have faced. And in this effort to conduct this study, I hope to be able to share some insight into how to effectively communicate with other culturally diverse learners and their families. Finally, based on this research and on some other study, I will share some recommendations for classroom teachers and all stakeholders who are striving to effectively communicate with this group of people. So to begin with, the country that I studied is Brazil. Brazil makes up half of the continent of South America, as many of you know, and it consists of well-known beach resorts such as Rio de Janeiro, and of course the huge impact that we've heard in the news about the Amazon river basins, rainforests. So Brazil is pretty well known across the world. Brazilian people are they're a passionate people. They value relationships and family heritage and cultural heritage, and their interactions, their personal communication style is evidence of this kind of mindset. They tend to have a much smaller personal bubble than Americans, North Americans particularly, and it's not uncommon for Brazilians to greet each other with a warm hug and a kiss on each cheek. Oftentimes you might find somebody new to the United States from Brazil and they greet you that way, and you'll see sort of a different reaction than what is customary in the United States. So touching on the Brazilian culture, the kind of personal interaction that typifies Brazilian culture is one of close physical contact, of meaningful conversations, and even subjects that might be considered taboo in the United States are not considered taboo there, such as sex and relationships and intimacy. Those are things that are not considered taboo in the Brazilian culture. Family, love, and relationships are very much the driving force behind their daily life. So holidays and celebrations of Brazil are all centered around family, as is I mentioned about their culture. So a couple of examples of their kind of celebrations are Mother's Day. Mother's Day is second only to Christmas as the most widely celebrated holiday or special day in Brazil. Mother's Day is the second Sunday in May, and it's called Dia de Mas. And schools often prepare kids for this special day. There's a feast of mothers on that Sunday, and so the last day before school, the last day before Mother's Day of school is typically spent especially preparing children to honor their mothers. Another big celebration every year is the Carnival. So millions of Brazilians gather in Rio de Janeiro for 4 days of party, music, and dance. And the common theme is to forget one's real life. The carnival takes place in February, just prior to Ash Wednesday. The primary participants of the carnival are those in the samba parade. So in the samba parade, there's what they call dance schools They're not really schools, but they're really groups of people representing different communities, typically of the lower socioeconomic range, people who might live in what they call favelas, which are a shanty kind of community. They're buildings that sometimes would have a lack of sanitation and water, but other times may have electricity and even computers. But however, so Brazilians really look forward to the Carnival every year. So typically it's consisting of this community of people from the favelas, and they save up all year long to be able to spend thousands of dollars on their costumes for the samba parade. And each community, each of the favelas, nominates a princess to be queen of the samba parade. And it's a really high honor for them to be chosen for this. So they save all year long and invest thousands of dollars in these costumes and the parade regalia to be able to have the chance to be named queen. It's an epic proportion. It's a time of life, it is said it's a time of celebration to forget about life. And then following Carnival is Ash Wednesday, when the tradition is for many people there to pray for forgiveness for their sins following Carnival. So moving on to the particular family of which that I studied, and the names have been changed to protect the anonymity of everyone involved, but the name we're going to use is Ada Salvador and her husband Orlando. So this family, Ada Salvador, immigrated from São Paulo, Brazil, to the United States in 2003. Salvador, along with her husband and at the time preschool-aged son, moved to northern Kentucky when her husband's company shut down their information technology operations in Brazil and transferred him to northern Kentucky to work in IT internet security. Salvador's profession in Brazil was as a labor law lawyer, and her husband, as I said, was an IT engineer. So moving from the urban setting of São Paulo to northern Kentucky has been an enormous cultural adjustment for the family. They have had to overcome challenges of a language barrier, cultural differences, changes in careers, and just differences in perspectives of ways of seeing the world. According to Salvador, many careers and government agencies are impacted by corruption in Brazil. For example, in her field of labor law, many corporations pay off officials to turn a blind eye to violations in labor law. And the government controls all of those kinds of laws. There aren't state agencies to enforce, regulate, or even make these kinds of laws. And so corruption is widespread there. Police in Brazil are not well paid, and many accept bribes to not police certain areas overrun by drug groups, mafias, and such. Violence and kidnapping are daily threats in Brazil. In urban areas such as São Paulo, heavy traffic areas can be very dangerous to citizens. Sometimes in the United States, especially around holidays, it is normal to see certain groups maybe approaching your vehicle, asking for donations, for example, firefighters or that kind of thing. However, drivers in urban areas of Brazil experience a different approach to their vehicles sometimes. They may be stopped in traffic and be approached by someone at gunpoint and demand their vehicle and them. It's not uncommon for criminals to hijack vehicles with their owners for several hours, holding them and their car while they force the individual to use their bank card to make purchases that the criminal wants them to do, and then later are released. In fact, Salvador, whom I interviewed for this project, knows of 3 close friends who this very thing happened to. So this type of violence and the pressure to work long hours prompted Salvador and her husband to pray for change. For them, change came in a call transferring them to the United States. So as I mentioned, one of the things that she's challenged with is the language barrier. and this has been one of the most impactful adjustments for her family. Coming from Brazil, in southern Brazil, as in the United States, there are local dialects and differences in a language across the country depending on the region you're in. So she comes from this rural area of Brazil, southern Brazil Portuguese, and she comes to northern Kentucky. And so even though she knew some English from school, and I'll touch on that in a little bit, it was a different English than she hears in northern Kentucky. So in Brazil, when she was studying English, she was taught by a Brazilian Portuguese native speaker learning English. And so as you can imagine, that sounds a little different than what she hears in parts of Kentucky. So in Brazil, Salvador was a lawyer, and in the U.S., her law degree did not transfer. So like many mothers, Salvador began working around her child's needs. So she worked for 2.5 years as a cafeteria worker for the school district that her son was enrolled in. And after interacting with an administrator in that school, that administrator prompted her to apply for a position as a paraeducator for English language learners and to share her experience as an immigrant with them. She did interview for that position, and she has been in that job for 12.5 years now. She describes her experience as mixed because, in her opinion, from her perspective, being an educator, especially a paraeducator, is sort of devalued in the American culture. And so that's a struggle that she didn't anticipate having to go through. So finally, I'm going to touch on recommendations for classroom teachers. So taking into consideration the kinds of experiences that this immigrant family has worked through, I would like to keep in mind those challenges as we approach how best to meet the needs to communicate with immigrants and culturally diverse families. So as an ELL teacher, I've often encountered very well-intentioned, highly educated teachers with a look of panic on their face when they have a newcomer student in their classroom. A newcomer is a student who has little or no English experience or proficiency. Other times, teachers have English language learners who seem to have adequate social English language proficiency, but then they're perplexed as to why that student is struggling with academic English proficiency. These are common things that happen in schools every day across our country. My first recommendation is to relax. Nobody expects one teacher to teach that English language learner everything he or she needs to know in the course of one school year. Learning academic English can take 5 to 7 years, and there are many factors that play into that rate of growth of proficiency. Secondly, focus on the rich experience that ELs bring to your classroom. Many of them have diverse cultures and heritages, and they bring rich past experiences that our native English-speaking students have never imagined. Approached from an asset-based perspective, having culturally diverse students in our classroom can be a mutually enriching experience for all stakeholders. The experiences of family and community separation, lack of or interrupted schooling, and a myriad of other stressors present challenges that many American students can learn from culturally diverse students and their families. Involve the families as much as possible. In terms of practical day-to-day experiences, there are solid research-based strategies many teachers have acquired and implemented which have proven to be effective in communicating with culturally diverse students and their families. One of these strategies is to use pictures, visuals, and realia wherever possible. Learn a few simple but pivotal words in that student's language. And not only does this accomplish the learning target that you have set, but it also conveys a sense of respect and value of that person's culture and heritage and language. So creating a culturally responsive classroom environment means embracing languages and cultures of all stakeholders in the school. Include translators for all essential communications, particularly ones that involve the safety of the students. emergency contact information, allergies, or past traumatic experiences that play a factor in that student's ability to be in school. Make connections between EL families and the community organizations with whom may provide services for them or for whom they may purchase things, health organizations, and the like. So be a bridge to that community and your EL learners. Host events for which students and families can participate without language. Maybe even consider hosting a cultural diversity evening or kick off the school year with a cultural diversity bash. Involving the families in these events would convey a tremendous amount to them. So these recommendations are just a tip of the iceberg. There are many more to consider. And for more suggestions and learning, please see my blog at SHELLEYFREEMANELL consultant.wordpress.com/blog. Thank you for investing in our ELs and their families, and they're such an important part of our future. You'll be glad you did. Thank you.